10, 9, 8. Go for main engine start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, I've got the fins all done, the super glue edging, and I'm ready to actually sand these. Normally I would sand this balsa when I start on a rocket because it's in a frame and I can keep everything flat, but this is scratch built, so I didn't have that luxury. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this block. We should keep things pretty straight. So pretty rough here. So what I'm going to do, this is about a 220, actually about a 320 grit, and I'm going to just take this and let the sandpaper do the sanding. I don't want to push on it because you can put divots in your fin and you can warp the fin. Okay, the other side. And it doesn't take long. This balsa sand's really easy. Okay, do the other side. Okay, now what I'm going to do also is break that edge there with this sandpaper. Don't have to do it much, just a little bit. Just to get rid of that really strong edge, that sharp edge. Okay, now next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my 400 grit sandpaper and do the same thing. This I don't really have to have a block because I'm just going to really lightly do it. It shouldn't take down much. Make sure I get onto that carbon fiber strips. And what this is going to do is going to make a super smooth surface for the sanding sealer to adhere to. And basically, a lot of people don't think this is a necessary step, but the smoother you get this on the beginning, the smoother the last part is going to be. So it's best to put a base of really nice sanding and polishing down. Okay, so we will sand that out with the 400. A lot stronger, man, tons stronger than just that balsa. I mean, it's good. But now we're going to do some sanding sealer on it. What I like to do before I do that is spray out all the sanding dust with canned air. Get it out of the grooves and the grain. And I'll do that to each piece, and then we're ready to put some sanding sealer. Okay, I'm ready to do the sanding sealer, and for this I like to use my lacquer sanding sealer, but this stuff is really smelly, so just make sure you're a well ventilated area, or do this outside. Have a respirator for this as well. So just not good stuff, but it works great. If you don't want to have to use that, there is some water-based stuff, this stuff here. This actually works pretty good. The problem is being water-based, does warp the fins a little bit. So after you place this on the fin, on both sides, let it dry to the touch, and then you need to put some wax paper around it and put a book on it, and then let it completely dry, and then you will usually straighten out any of the warps. But anyways, them's the breaks on some of that stuff. So I'm going to open this stuff up. Really wish there was another alternative that worked great. Didn't smell this bad, but okay. Now what I need to do is I need to stir this up because, go wide here a little bit. There's some white filler coat in there and it settles to the bottom. So if it's a little transparent, you do need to mix it up. It'll fill the grain better if you have this well mixed. Okay. Okay, so take a foam brush like this here. And this is what we're aiming for. This is one fin that's been done. You can see it's almost like hard plastic shellac on it. It's sealed in that bumper, and that's the idea that we're going to do with these ones. So in this one you can tell it's not quite there. So I'm take the sanding sealer and I'm going to go from one end. The first coat is going to soak into the balsa pretty easy, so you can apply quite a bit of it. The second will not be as absorbent. Okay, we're just going to brush it on in an even coat. You don't want it too super thin. You want to, put a pretty liberal amount on there so it gets all over. Okay. Make sure I get on those bumpers. We'll get down in the corners here. And try just not to get it on the other side, because when you set it down on something for it to dry, that's going to stick to whatever. So just make sure that this side is dry. Set it up on something high, and then move to the next one, and we'll do this coat, and then we'll sand it, and then we'll do a couple more coats. Okay, I've got the sanding sealer on these fins, first coat, and they're really pretty rough because that sanding sealer makes kind of a rough texture to it. So what I'm going to do, instead of just sanding it off, I'm going to actually use a 4/0 steel wool, and what this does is it actually kind of sands and polishes, so it works really good for doing laminations and so forth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to just use a mask or a respirator when you do this, because these are little metal filings. You don't want these blowing in the air, especially after you're done. You need to sweep them up instead of blowing them away. So I'm going to use small circles, and you'll be able to see the actual fin change color from a darker yellow to a lighter. But most of all, you'll feel it get really super slick versus this. I mean, you can kind of hear it. So anyways, I'll go over this and even go over the ends here with the carbon fiber. So we'll polish all those out, and then we're ready to do another coat over the top. Again, it will be a little bit thicker, won't soak in as much as what I should say, because you're on top of the other layer. But I'll do that 3 times, and then we'll be done with the fins. Okay, working on the Rascal V2 project. I'm ready to put the fins on. I've got the fins all done with 3 coats of the sanding sealer, and buffed them out, and ready to put them on. They're nice and solid, much better than they were originally. So I'll get everything prepped and we'll glue these in. Okay, I'm ready to put fin number 3 in. I labeled the fins to whatever fit best in these slots, and that one fits pretty good. Now what I've also done is I've shimmed these a little bit with some balsa wood because they weren't reaching. From sanding, unfortunately I sanded a little too much, so I put these little shims in there so they'll actually fit. You can hear them rubbing now, so actually this will actually be glued to that centerpiece. Now I am going to use epoxy on these instead of the regular white glue or yellow glue, and I'm going to use quite a bit of it. So I want to be able to line the fin correctly and hold it in place while that dries, and I'm going to use the Estes fin alignment guide. And what it's going to do, I've got some tape on it to hold it in place, but basically it's going to fit down on it here and make it 90 degrees, and that holds it just enough to be 90 degrees and holds it to dry. So let's get started on getting this first fin in. Okay, so I'm going to make up some epoxy. This is 30-minute 2-part epoxy, and I want quite a bit of it because I'm going to be putting quite a bit of it on these fins. That way it holds. Okay. A little unequal. So we're going to swab off this stuff here. Then we're going to mix this stuff together. And we want to make sure it gets really completely mixed. Rolling the toothpick as well, so we don't get any gooey stuff and the non-hardening stuff on the toothpick or anything, because that's really frustrating. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue these bases here and put them in. I don't want a super ton of it, and I don't want it to move and spill into the next fin area, but I do want a bit here. So what we're going to do is we're going to put it on the bottom and let it wick in a bit there. And then what I'm going to do is put some along the base here, and this will actually drip down since it takes half an hour to dry. It'll drip down and it should make sort of a fillet thing on its own. Okay, and if there's any gaps, I want this epoxy thick enough that it'll jump any of the gaps. So that looks pretty decent. So we're going to fit the fin in as straight as we can. Okay. And I want to push it towards the back, so I'm going to pull it this way. And that way all the fins are lined up correctly. Okay. I'm going to take my alignment tool and press it down to the tube and then slide it back, holding the fin tight. Okay. Make sure that's down, and then we're going to tape it down in place. Okay. Now, that should hold it pretty level. Some of the epoxy did get on this area here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean that up with some of the isopropyl alcohol and some Q-tips. And I don't mind, I mean, I'm going to be making a fillet of it anyways there, but right now I just want it clean. So we'll just wipe that down. Okay. This is 91% isopropyl alcohol. Okay. Clean the other side. Now, one of the things I do want to do is make sure that this whole unit is sitting against the inside motor mount. So I'm just going to give it a push down, and it looks like it is going to hold. So we will let it dry there. This one I'm going to let dry a little longer than the half an hour. Even though this is half an hour epoxy, it actually fully holds in about 8 hours, so we're going to give that about 8 hours or overnight, and then we'll do the other fins in sequence. Alright, moving along on my Rascal project. I've got the fins all glued in. They are really super stout, and this little piece here, those carbon fiber things, have made a world of difference. I mean, these things are really super strong. Now, what I've done here is I've started doing some of the fillets with epoxy, and I mean, it's making that bulletproof. So what I'm going to do, and how I did that one with the epoxy fillets, one thing I have to do, since there is a gap here and here a little bit, I don't want the epoxy, since it's half an hour, it's going to have time to run, so I don't want it running through there and then all down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tape off the one side with some tape and make a dam and just keep the epoxy from running through there. Just got to make sure I get it fairly tight against the fin, so we'll just push it in there, smooth it like that, and do the rear. And unfortunately, to make these fins fit the inside and mesh with the tube on the inside, I had to leave a little bit of a gap on there. Okay, so that is the taping done. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to make a fillet here. But what I want to do is I want to fill that gap first. That way it doesn't have a sinkhole right here. So I'm going to get my epoxy ready. And this is the 30-minute stuff. Always make sure you don't touch the nozzles to the other tube's material, because it will cross-contaminate and you'll lose all your epoxy. So the other thing is we're going to get our Q-tips ready to smooth it out. Okay, so take our epoxy and we're going to mix it up. And this stuff, you know, it holds a little bit. It still can run though in a half an hour. It can, especially when I mix it with, or you know, use the Q-tips with the isopropyl alcohol on it that thins it out. It makes it a little more runny. So, okay, got all that ready to go. Now I'm just going to lay that in on the gap there. Give you a better shot of it there. Okay. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to put it on that gap, and then I'm going to kind of poke it in and push it in to make sure I fill that first. That way, if I just go right across, it'll slowly go in there and, like I said, make a sinkhole. That's not what we want. So let's just make sure it gets in there real good. And this is this epoxy is holding to the plastic a lot better than I thought it would. I did one fin already, and it's like I showed, it made it really super strong. So we're scraping that in there and pushing it in. And the front, make sure on the front you go around the front, because the tip of it needs some work too. Push that in. You can see it's well, maybe or maybe not. You can see, but it is sinking into that gap. Like I said, just use the toothpick to work it in, like so. And then when it levels off, we can actually start moving into the rest of the gap here. Now, if the gap is too thick, I'll show you on one of the fins, the gap here. When I cut it open and sanded it, it made a really big gap, and it would be too hard to fill with the epoxy or even super glue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually shim it with some more balsa. Okay, so now we've got the epoxy where I want it. It looks like it's a good amount. And now we're going to smooth out the area with a Q-tip dipped in 91% isopropyl, and I'm going to roll it as I push it, and just lightly, because I want a nice transition. I don't want it to be real super stark. Okay. And now that we've got it pushed in, we're going to clean up the area here. Okay. And I've got kind of a mess going on up at the front here because I've got it tilted down, and it seems to want to go right into where that tape is. So we're going to clean that up. Pull that tape back just slightly. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to try to get it to be a little more level, and then we're going to let it dry and move on to the next fin. We got to do this 4 times, and we'll have some reinforced fins and nice smooth fillets.